everyone to Huntington Arts Council's Conversations in the Arts and Women. This panel was originally scheduled for March, Women's History Month, but I'm very happy we were able to reschedule everything and bring this to you. I'm Mark Cortade, Huntington Arts Council's Executive Director. I'm coming to you from the comforts of my kitchen. I like to put a different piece of artwork from my collection in the background. Tonight I chose a piece called Lucy in the Skies with Diamonds by one of Huntington Arts Council's artists, Arlene McLaughlin. And why did I choose this? Well, not only is it a great piece, but Lucille Ball was the first woman to own and head a studio in Hollywood. In fact, she worked at RKO studios in the 1930s. In the 1950s, those are the studios she bought. I feel like I'm on public television at times. Normally there's a small fee for these things, so we waive that because of how we're doing this. If anyone would care to make a donation at any point in the conversation, please do so. Why we started doing this, we wanted to bring people into our galleries for reasons other than to look at the paintings behind us. Normally that's where we do these things. These are not normal times. I'll just give a few plugs for Huntington Arts Council. Currently in our gallery, we have our member show, which will be up through June 28th. It's hung so that it's viewable from the windows. You can see it from the outside. But please check our website. We've got everything in the show on our website, and we're doing a lot of social media every day on the pieces that are in it. So please check in. This Tuesday, the 16th? No. Whatever this Tuesday is, from 11 to 12:30, we are doing an Arts Administrator Forum. That is a technical assistance. We're doing a social media roundtable. Who are baffled by social media. I'm coming into the 21st century slowly. We have some great experts. Our moderator will be our Director of Marketing and Communications, Maureen Starr, along with Susanna Stickley, Samantha Klink, and Jose Tudavim. Next month, please join us on July 2nd for another Conversation in the Arts. That one is the Arts and Words. It was originally for April, which was National Poetry Month, but we have some terrific group for that one as well. Panelists will be Nicole Estioquendo, Stephen Prestia, Walter Sargent, and our moderator will be Cynthia Shore from the Walt Whitman Birthplace. Tonight, happy to introduce our panelists, and I will turn this over to them shortly. We have Erika Duncan, who is Executive and Artistic Director of HERstory. We have Karen Levitov, who is the Director and Curator of the Paul W. Zuccaire Gallery at the Stoller Center, Stony Brook University. And I was just reminiscing with her. Karen was a panelist on the very first Conversations in the Arts we did as a trial, April of 2019. Next, we have Sally Shore, who is an artist. She's one of our members. Right now, she has a beautiful triptych in the member show. It's right in front of the window. If you drive by, park the car, take a look in. She does gorgeous work, as you can see right behind her as well. Kay Sohini has joined us. She's a PhD candidate, an instructor at Humanities at Stony Brook University. And last, certainly not least, moderating us tonight will be Deborah Cosher, who is from the League of Women Voters. To our group, welcome. Please share. Remember, you don't have to agree with each other. Just have a conversation about it. And remember, this is a conversation in the arts. So thank you. Take it away, Deborah and panelists. Your mic's off, Deborah. There you go.
Good evening, everybody. Let's start with our panelists briefly introducing themselves to our viewers. So how about we start with you, Sally?
Okay, I'm currently a fiber artist with a studio in Glen Cove. I studied fine art years and years and years ago at Kent State University before it became infamous. And my degree was in graphic design. Now I do fiber. You see the ribbon weaving behind me. I also do handbags and wall hangings and felt work and bead weaving and all kinds of fiber. So
Very beautiful work. It's gorgeous. Erika, tell us a little about HERstory.
Okay, so 25 years ago, I decided to offer a week of free workshops to follow a conference on women, celebrating women writers and women breaking silences, you know, figuring it would be a week of free workshops. And I didn't like the idea of, when I really thought about it, I didn't like the idea of people having to expose themselves, you know, before a transient audience of strangers. I had always thought that it was safer to have a closed group, whether I taught at the university or taught writing in my home. And to make a very long story short, I invented this idea of this imaginary stranger reader walking in at any page one moment of one's life. And how does one dare this stranger to walk in your shoes, to care? So what has happened over these 25 years is that the quality, even in the first couple of days of the writing, based on narrative structure constructed around what caused empathy in a reader, has had, you know, amazing ramifications, human rights, healing, women's, you know, issues. And at the moment, I would usually say that we have 11 to 17 workshops in the jails, in the schools, in the community. At this point, we have the same number, all on Zoom calls like this one. And we have, but depending on registration for some of them, we'll have 14 to 17 facilitators who are trained in a big summer program coming up of stories for our time. That, and we're definitely about advocacy, about, you know, raising voices to change hearts, minds, and policy, one story at a time.
Thank you, Erika. It's fascinating. Kay?
Hi, my name is Sohini, and I'm a comics maker and a PhD candidate, as Mark mentioned. And so I think the highlight of my life right now is that instead of writing my doctoral dissertation, I'm kind of like drawing it as a comic, because my research deals with gender, race, and sexuality, but I wanted it to be very accessible and, you know, like fall in the realm of what we know as public humanities. So instead of writing it, I wanted to draw it. So, you know, like more people, even my parents, can read it and understand it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And essentially in my both academic and creative work, I try to use comics as a way to amplify marginalized voices. So yeah, that's all from me right now.
Okay, Karen?
Hi, great to be back and part of this panel. I'm the curator and director of the Paul W. Zuccaire Gallery at Stoller Center for the Arts at Stony Brook University. I've been there for 6 years. I organize professional artist shows as well as exhibitions by the graduate and undergraduate students at Stony Brook and the faculty. We focus on contemporary art, and I'm interested in issues of social justice in a lot of the exhibitions that I organize. I also teach a class in gallery management, and before this, I was a curator at the Jewish Museum in Manhattan.
Thank you. So moving on, as part of the cultural landscape of Long Island, you all have viewpoints and visions that are shaped by your experiences and your backgrounds. Please share with us how you support the arts and include any examples of your work and how you do it. And who would like to go first? Shall we start with Erika?
Okay, so I think Long Island, as we all know, is a very, very strange place with neighborhoods and silos. And research has shown that it's the second most segregated suburban community in all of Long Island. So a lot of our work that we're doing is really building bridges between communities. And this point, we're also going beyond Long Island shores. We have a student program for the summer of student stories for our time, where there are different groups that have formed. There's a group of Black student voices that now we write. There's a group of dreamers, you know, DACA recipients and new immigrants. And we have a group for new language learners where immigrant students from Long Island will be writing their stories with refugee students from upstate New York. So the idea is to continually, when we work in the jails, we've brought together formerly incarcerated people with criminology students at HERstory University. In terms of women's issues, we've looked at, our latest book was I Dream About You, Addiction, Incarceration, and Family Love. And looking at addicted mothers, we're looking at the stories of people who have been silenced and people whose voices aren't heard. We work with the rural migrant ministries, with the women, the wives of the migrant workers. We work with women who are housekeepers and nannies and cooks, and, you know, with girls, you know, pregnant and parenting girls. So, you know, across culture, across all kinds of things. So we're very much about trying to raise women's voices in places where they're not necessarily heard. And finally, I believe that, you know, not only women's stories, but grassroots stories are mostly not taken seriously as part of the canon in either publishing or in teaching and research. So, you know, we have an archive at HERstory University where we're trying to change all this. So that's a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kay, how about you?
Your mic's off, Kay.
Sorry about that. So I actually, I'm not from here. I'm from Calcutta, India. I moved here 3 years back and now I live in Queens. So I'm not actually very up on the Long Island community, at least the arts community. But I just want to take a moment to thank Erika, because I actually know her from my first year at Stony Brook, and I participated for very briefly in one of her writing workshops. And I think that's one of the, you know, like I felt so welcome in there. I was like so new there. I knew nobody, but Erika, it's amazing. Like, I just want to thank her for how welcome she made me feel in her writing group. That was really amazing.
Oh, that's nice.
Very special. Karen?
Yes, Erika, you also had some wonderful ways of getting people involved and telling their stories. That's great. And I'm also interested in that. And one of the things that we've done in the art gallery is to try to encourage a lot of student and community participation. So for some exhibitions, like we had a photography exhibition called Race, Love, and Labor that was photography by artists of color. And we had opportunities for visitors to come into the gallery, look at the work and respond to it on a whiteboard where we had people could write or draw, or, you know, they could do what they wanted to respond to the artwork on view with issues of identity and race and love and labor, as well as take a picture that would be part of, you know, adding their picture to the gallery. We did a similar thing when we had the Guerrilla Girls exhibition at the gallery a number of years ago, where we had a chalkboard and we had a Post-it note area where people could respond and bring their own voices to the gallery. And this is something that we try to do. We're having an upcoming exhibition on environmental artists that's also going to have a component of allowing people to participate in and respond to what they're seeing in the gallery.
That's great.
That's excellent. It's great when you can have participation with the people who created it and then the patrons that are coming in to see it. I love that. That's a great idea. Sally,
Okay, my support of the arts on Long Island consists of a number of groups that I belong to, plus some teaching. I'm a member of the Huntington Arts Council, and as Mark said, I'm in the current show, the member show. I have taught and have been a member a long time in the Art League of Long Island in Dix Hills. And the big one is the Long Island Craft Guild. And we have a fair. So all of those things are bringing art to the public. And I always love when we have a nice busy reception, particularly at Huntington's Arts Council. They're very busy, where you get to talk to people about the work that's hanging on the walls. So those are the kinds of things I've done locally.
Excellent. I'm just going to say something because obviously I'm not an artist and I'm not creative, but this past year, and because of COVID, we weren't able to do it, but we were reaching out. We were co-sponsoring with the town of Huntington. It was our league's idea because it was it is the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, all American women getting the right to vote. And there's such little civic engagement among the youth, and it's not taught that much in the high schools anymore, that we had a program that was going to be a creative arts contest, and that all the local high schools were going to be able to participate in whatever form they were comfortable with. So whether it was poetry or writing or making a dress or painting a picture or a sculpture, we even said that if you're a scientist, you could make a mathematical equation. So however you could celebrate the diversity of the suffrage movement. And we had all these wonderful plans for it, and they were going to get awards, and we was going to be judged at the town of Huntington, and COVID came along and it was disbanded. But we're going to try to do it again, and I may be reaching out to some of you to help us out in either judging it or working with some of the students. So that's my connection to the art world, has been through the youth and the League of Women Voters, but it didn't pan out, unfortunately.
If I may just chime in here a little bit, when I said this started out as an experiment 2 years ago, in 2018 and in 2019, the governor put out a call through the Regional Economic Development Corporation he does, and it was for the arts to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the vote. 2018 in the state, 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And I put together what I thought was a really great proposal, and it involved not only the Huntington Arts Council, but the Vanderbilt Museum, the Whitman House, the Whaley Museum, and it was to be a year and a half, 2 year celebration of women. And unfortunately, we didn't get funding, but that some of the work that went into it is like fruition tonight. So you take your victories where you can.
Exactly. And with the work that Erika does, it's so amazing how she reaches out to the diverse communities. And our whole focus was going to be that so many people are just aware of the typical wealthy white women that were suffragists, and yet it crossed all borders or boundaries. And that was supposed to be our focus. So maybe someday we'll do it anyway. But, all right, so we'll move on. So COVID-19 shut down so many events in mid-March. Were you able to do anything cultural, artistic, or celebratory for International Women's Day that was on March 8th?
I think there's some...
Can anybody jump in? I mean, most things were shut down, but did anybody get a chance?
I can jump in on that. At Stony Brook at the gallery, we were able to have a program on Monday, March 9th, which was our last program. And even then we were trying to space the chairs far apart even before the word social distancing had really caught on. But we were able to have a program. We showed a film called Taking Residence, a history of the AIR gallery, which was one of the first galleries to show, it was established by women and shows only women, and is still in existence today, now in Brooklyn, showing women artists. And one of the founding members of that gallery is Howardina Pindell, who is a painting professor at Stony Brook. And so she spoke after the film, which showed her in 1972. And she was able to speak about founding that gallery and being a woman and an African-American woman, the only African-American woman as the founding member, one of the founding members of AIR Gallery, and her experience of that, and of even when white women got rights, that not all women of color did. So her experience with that was really powerful and important.
Excellent. Excellent. Did anybody else get to?
Yeah, I can jump in there. So I was actually in Boston. So it was the last time I actually went out before the pandemic started. So I was attending a conference on comics. Actually, it was a conference on literature, but I was hosting a roundtable on comics. And I didn't expect for it to happen, but one of my panelists was Professor Dawn K. Ling. And she completely blew my mind. She had this presentation on her research process and her inspiration on creating a nonfiction comic, which is essentially about the lives of two Chinese American immigrant women, and who were actually known for resisting gender and racial discrimination by doing several important translation work for various, like philanthropic organizations to ensure rights and freedom and welfare for Chinese immigrants. And she kind of like, it's a very detailed piece of history, but she does it by illustrating all of it in a very accessible manner. It's actually up on our website if any of you want to check it out. And I remember it was very coincidentally International Women's Day on that day. And I remember being very pleased and very surprised at and it was definitely the highlight of my last weekend before all this started. Yeah, I just wanted to share that for a second.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so now, have you experienced any gender bias in your cultural and/or arts career? Are there certain areas that are more or less accepting of women? How about, we'll start with Sally.
Okay. There's good news and bad news here. The good news is that I'm in the craft medium, and there's not as much gender bias in craft media as there is in fine art. The bad news is I'm in the craft media, and galleries have a bias against craft media. So that's kind of my story. I came into producing art in the late 60s, and there was a big craft movement going on. And there were a lot of female craft artists, weavers and fiber artists who were in galleries. Sheila Hicks and Lenore Tawney and Claire Zeisler. I wasn't at that level, so I didn't have any access like that, but I was in the American, there was a store across from from MoMA in the late 60s, and I did get work in there. So my bias is not gender bias, it's media bias. And usually when I enter shows, I enter competitions, and the entries are wiped of all identifying characteristics. Nobody knows if you're male or female. So if you get into something, they can't do gender bias on those.
That's excellent.
I might want to just point out, and I hope the other panelists will respond to the question too, but Sally, is that maybe a chain reaction against gender bias because of the media? If you say crafts, are not viewed.
Because it's women's work and,
Yeah.
and utilitarian.
Yeah.
It's partly, but there are a lot of men in the craft. Peter Volkos, ceramics, and Dale Chuli, and there are plenty of men who do craft that's considered art. So part of it depends on where you live in the country. I came here in the late 60s, early 70s, and there were gallerists and critics in New York that would not consider crafts at all. Other places all over the country, crafts were big. They were in galleries. So, it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
So take it as you find it, I guess.
Yeah.
Karen, how about you?
I can't say directly that I've experienced gender bias. I think that, when I first started out in my career, just maybe being a woman, maybe being small, maybe being young when I first started out, that, you know, that I was looked upon, you know, as in a perhaps in a lesser role, but not as a direct, you know, I don't know if I necessarily, you know, didn't get a job or a promotion or anything like that. But, you know, I just feel like sometimes that, I don't know. I'm from the Midwest, and not necessarily, you know, when I first came to New York, you know, it seemed like, oh, everybody is louder and pushier than me, and maybe I'm getting overlooked because I wasn't being as loud or pushy. I don't know. I've been here a long time now, so I'm probably just as loud and pushy as everybody else. But, you know, you know, at first, you know, I can't tell you if it was gender or being short or being, you know, female or, you know, Midwestern or anything else that, you know, that I felt like, oh, maybe I'm somewhere around here.
All right. And what about you, Kay?
Your mic, you keep muting your mic, Kay.
Oh, I keep muting my mic because it's really noisy here. I have a construction site right outside. So yeah, but are we still on
Gender bias in the arts?
Yes. So I want to say, like, in the comics industry, like, I mean, this is just common knowledge, like, it's super male dominated, and to the extent where a lot of early comic books were actually had very violent and very misogynistic portrayal of women. But I don't know, like, if I did this consciously, but I went for a very niche subgenre, which is known as graphic memoirs, or, you know, like autofiction, autocomics. So, and I think that niche genre is quite inclusive and diverse, and it makes space for a large, a very diverse range of creators. So I feel hopeful, but I'll really be able to answer that question in a couple of years when I'm actively looking for, at least now, actually in 1.5 years, when I'm actually looking for jobs in that industry. But I am hopeful, but I'm also not naive. So yeah, that's essentially my answer.
Okay. Erika, let's hear from you.
I actually want to build on what Sally was saying, because it's within fields and within genres. You have this distinction between women's art or realization and men. And I remember when I was in my early 20s and first studying writing, feeling very complimented by my teacher, who was a woman and, you know, a well-known-ish writer at the new school, saying, you know, your writing is really like that of a man. And I mean, and then, of course, like whatever, 7 years later, I was starting the salon for women writers, where, you know, most of the feminist people who are sort of icons, like Alice Walker and Adrienne Rich, and we're all like presenting at our house, including AIR Gallery. But anyway, but one of the things that was very interesting is that women's ways of writing, which there was a conference I went to in Ireland where Catherine Stimson, who was a big Barnard scholar, was giving a speech about how men are always saying, get to the point, and this sort of phallic image. And the women's whole sensibility was something else. And I would say that's 70s or so. In all these years, what I've seen, which I think is a positive thing for women's sensibilities, women's ways of thinking and feeling, that now I'm seeing more and more leadership on the part of women. And I'm seeing men, you know, who are entering our workshop, who really are allowing women to take the leadership in terms of, you know, a different kind of aesthetic that allows for more feeling, more not getting to the point, more sort of multiplicity. So I actually see huge changes in that, you know. So
it's great. Now that's good news.
Yeah.
Now, were there strong female role models for you in your in your area of art, or just even in your area of education and where you wanted to go? Sally?
One of my strongest female role models was my high school English and history teacher. Very strong woman. She happened to be a member of the church I went to as well. Very independent. I don't know how to explain her. She was great, and she showed me that women can be strong, and they could. I think she went off the syllabus a lot, and the students knew it, and we appreciated it. I think she's my strongest. My mother, of course. And then as I got older and out of college, you know, Gloria Steinem and I'll say Jackie Kennedy. You know, they were just strong people, had a strong presence, I'll say.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll pass now.
Karen?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, my mother also is a very strong influence on me from the time I was young, and she was a feminist and strong in her own career, and, you know, went back to school and got a PhD and started teaching when I was in school, and still takes people all over the world to Africa and has a very adventurous life. So she's definitely a strong role model for me in a lot of ways. I think that there are a number of really strong women in the arts, in all fields of the arts, but in museums, my field especially, there are a good number of women leaders. You know, going back to the previous question about bias, I mean, there are a number of a good number, maybe more than 50% or nearing 50% of women in leadership roles now in the arts, but the pay scale is still not the same as for men. So that's one problem. But there are a good number of women who, you know, are curators and directors now that there weren't a number of years ago, that they were mostly in education fields of museums and and you know, more of the service kind of areas rather than in leadership roles, and that's changing. So so I'm pleased about that and hope that eventually the pay scales can even out as well.
Oh, most definitely. Kay?
Right. So I grew up in a very small, very conservative town which did not let its women take lead, unfortunately, but I was always a very avid reader. So in the beginning, I read a lot of very canonical, Western canonical works like your Fitzgerald, your Hemingway, or some English translations of Russian literature. But when I was in high school, I think I found Alison Bechdel and Marjane Satrapi's works, and they literally changed my life. And I don't really mean that as you know, like a metaphor or something, because it made me consider a career in the arts for the first time, because I thought like I would probably do something sciencey up till then. But the way they kind of it was like, for me, it was, the literature was like a form of protest, a form of resistance against homophobia or against racism or against, or in Satrapi's case, against fascism. So it was kind of like my foray into art through them. And they're obviously, like, I don't know them. I can never hope to know them, but they really served as role models to me, like from far away. And it's because of their work that I kind of like do comics the way I do right now.
It's wonderful. Erika?
Yeah, I guess, again, I came of age as a writer at the point where there was so much change from the hierarchical structure, which is how I began, even with a woman mentor, where everybody who sort of wrote in a way that was closest to the way she did was sort of taken into the inner circle. And if you were not sort of that exact aesthetic, you were thrown away. And I was in that inner circle, and then all of a sudden crashing in with the beginning of the second wave of the feminist movement. We just ended up with all these women who were breaking the norms and, you know, like really questioning what is biography, you know, what is the whole subjective, objective. And, you know, it was just a really exciting time. so that they were the ones who were, say, 30 years older than I was, or even when I was at that point 40 years, who were breaking ground, but they were breaking ground out of even people like Judith Malina, the Living Theater, and and then there were people who were maybe 10 years older that were sort of just like changing the whole way women writers needed to be looked at. And then, as people were talking before, there was the whole thing of, trying to change it from a culture of white privilege. And a lot of the struggles were, and we don't have time now, but they were very messy. They were very complicated. And there was also a lot of idealization of women's relationships, whether they were love relationships, mentor, work, peer, and a lot of deep unhappiness when that idealization was broken, because women were humans too. So, I mean, I think it's just was a very rich but very complicated time.
Okay.
If I may
Now,
just jump in before we go to the next question, it's interesting to me to hear this because I guess I'm the only man here. But I work in a field that has been traditionally accepting of women. I believe I am the first male executive director at the Huntington Arts Council, and we are 1963 till now. I'm the first male. Around the state with other arts councils, I would say it's about 50-50, which is, people aren't hired that way. It just sort of works out that way. And it's funny, it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning about, Erika, about how Long Island is such a crazy place. It's very territorial. Most other counties of the state, there's one arts council, one county. What do we have? 126 school districts here. At least a dozen arts councils on Long Island. This is not the norm. We're very close to it. But I think there's a good representation in the arts. And like I said at the beginning, Karen, I think the visual arts were, almost the last bastion. But, as far as like theater, women made great strides. I've worked with women designers, women directors, women playwrights. And it's almost, you don't even say women director anymore, women designer, women playwright. You just say director, playwright, etc. And, that I think is a good thing. The arts are a very accepting place. I'll go back to, role models, which was how this started. I was a student at the University of Buffalo in the 70s, and there was a great English department. I mean, a fantastic English department. So, and one semester, Anthony Burgess came over as a visiting professor. He wrote A Clockwork Orange, for those of a different generation. And he was a fascinating man to listen to, but he came into a lot of different classes. And one classroom was a very feminist teacher, and she asked, is there a strong role model or a strong contemporary of yours and he just hands down said, Iris Murdoch. She's the best of my generation. She's the strongest, and it was just, the world was changing at that time. And it was, people like that. And it just, I will never forget that. Every time I read something by Iris Murdoch or see something mentioning Iris Murdoch, it brings me back to that. That might have been one of my first conscious ideas that, of course I knew that, women were equal to men, but I grew up in a whole different era where, a woman being a doctor was special instead of ordinary. And it just, nowadays, but I'm grateful to say the arts have been fairly accepting, at least in my tenure in the arts, which the last 30 years. Yeah, I do think so. And I don't know if you disagree with me on that, but
a little bit. But I don't know if we're supposed to have discussions now or.
That's okay.
Well, let's finish the questions and then we can have our discussions.
Okay.
So, name 2 artists that influenced you to be involved in the arts. I guess it doesn't have to be 2, but 1 or 2. Karen, how about you? Was there any particular artist that influenced you to be involved in the arts?
Well, I think when I had my first museum job when I was still in college, and I wasn't even an art history major yet at that time, but I was really influenced by Cindy Sherman, whose work was in the collection of the small contemporary museum where I worked in Madison, Wisconsin. And, I just, was really struck by these self-portraits in various costumes and getups, and using the idea of film stills for photography, and using herself as the subject matter in various guises. And I just felt like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. And she was really one of the early influences. And another photographer, Lorna Simpson, was another early artist who I was really excited by, African-American identity as well as gender issues in her work that just were, to me, just very, very excited, and made me decide, to go back and to get, a graduate degree in art history and continue in the museum field.
Excellent.
I'm just getting some comments in here, Karen. Karen is like nodding along with you on that. He's and just trying to say yes to what all of you are saying. You just hit 2 of his favorites. Right there.
Great.
Sally, did you have any artists that inspired you?
Well, I have kind of a mishmash. I have Mary Cassatt.
Oh, I love her.
Yeah. Helen Frankenthaler, Georgia O'Keeffe,
Mm-hmm.
and then Victor Vasarely and MC Escher. The last 2 of which are kind of evident in my work.
Definitely. Definitely so. What about you, Kay? Any cartoonists?
Turn your mic on. Okay, your microphone.
Sorry. Right. So when I first came here, I was just working towards a PhD. I had no idea, like 3 and a half years later, that my career would almost entirely be about art and comics. But it was primarily Nick Susanis and Ebony Flowers, whose work gave me the courage to, actually illustrate my own dissertation, because they were the first ones. I think Nick Susanis was the first one to do that, to actually draw his dissertation. And it was followed by Ebony Flowers, who just got nominated for an Eisner Award. So they were the people who inspired me to do this. And I actually know one of them. So he's my external dissertation reader. So it's been such a pleasure to, be able to do this kind of work, because I remember, I think 5 years back when I was just finishing my master's, I remember telling one of my professors that I really want to draw my dissertation. And he was like, you can't do that. And I was like, but I really want to. But he kind of, spoke me down. And it was a man. And it was kind of really humiliating there for a second. But I was kind of very, very bent on it. And so I started applying to PhD programs, and as soon as I could draw a little better than I used to, I contacted Nick Susanis, who has been such a huge help to me throughout the process. And yeah, that's who I would say, Susanis and Flowers, they were really instrumental in my work.
Excellent. And Kay, who inspired you? Oh, I'm sorry, Erika. I meant Erika, sorry.
Yeah, well, I think I started out being a disciple of Marguerite Young and being very, very close to her. And then gradually, Tilly Olson, Meredith Lesueur were some of the, and then after a while, I think certainly Toni Morrison, and I was, I think the idea of Juna Barnes also, when I was young, I just loved Juna Barnes. But I also loved a lot of, I loved Gorky. I loved some of the male writers as well. And, I was always trying to see sort of if women could raise their voices, in terms of that kind of, this telephone. But anyway, I think it's easier to let it do its thing. Well, maybe not. I can. Oh, here. Let's see. Okay. Yeah. Let's see. Okay, sorry about
There
that.
you go.
But anyway, I think that again, it was the writers who were sort of not totally in sync with their time that really kind of giving you the courage to, I think, being unpopular and feeling good about being unpopular was a big thing at that point, and probably still is.
Excellent. So,
Can I just jump in a minute? There's some great comments that I'd like to read.
sure.
That people are responding to what we're saying about. And I'm going to go back when she first made a comment when we were talking about what you did to celebrate women March 8th during the month there. One of our artists, Gaetano Zanzanica, said she painted a portrait of Clara Barton memorializing nurses, and which is wonderful. But there's another, just someone who inspired her. This is, you read these things. Andy Warhol, when she was 14 years old, she met him in a club speaking about his pop art. And that must have been quite an experience. Some other ones that came in here, Cosmira Mohanty mentioned Paula Scheer and Frida Kahlo as being big influences on her work. And I can almost see the Kahlo influence on some of your work, Cosmira. Ellie Berman, who does some great interactive installation, was influenced by Frankenthaler, Motherwell, Klein, and a painter from Lenox, MA, Mildred Hotto, whose glazes made her salivate. And that's what I like about artists. We just have ways of saying some of these great things here. So I think we just struck a lot of nerves with what you were talking there, and we'll probably get into some more, but I wanted to read those right now because they're very germane to what we're saying. So you're doing a great job. Thank you.
So now, have you done or been a part of programming which was exclusively featuring the works of women? So, Karen, I think you have. Oh, I'm sorry. Sally, do you want to go? Go ahead.
Sure. I was at the Air Gallery with the Textile Study Group of New York, probably about 10 years ago. And I was in the show at the Williamsburg Art and History Center that was all women fiber artists, and they were drawn from all over, I think all over the US, but it was a local curator from Seacliff who I've become very friendly with, Marsha Widener. And those are the only ones that were exclusively for and by women.
Excellent. Karen?
Yeah, I think it was actually at the women's art panel that I was on a year ago at the Huntington Arts Council that I realized that I had done 5 solo shows by at the Zuccaire Gallery since I'd been there, and all 5 of them were women. I hadn't even realized that until that point. But in addition, and I've done 2- and 3-person shows that included men as well, but just like, oh, the solo shows have been all women. But in addition to that, the Guerrilla Girls exhibition, of course, was an anonymous collective of lots of women artists and really focused on women. And then the environmental show that I'm working on right now is 5 women artists, and it was supposed to actually take place this fall, and it was supposed to be, it's the focus of the show is on environmental art, but it was going to be part for the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage to have a show entirely by women. But we're postponing that show. It's actually going to be the following year instead because of the coronavirus situation and needing to do that. But it's been really interesting to work with these groups of all women artists, and it's an interesting dynamic. So.
Excellent. Kay, what about you? Have you been involved in an all-woman exclusive?
Yeah, so it actually didn't happen on purpose, I won't lie, but I was organizing this roundtable in Emily, which was in Seattle this last Jan. And my panel comprised of 8 comic artists and scholars, and they were all women. And I had not realized that when I was making the programming. It just happened to be that way. And then I was just, I was like, I should have done this, like on purpose, but I'm glad it happened that way. And it was really such a thrill to, like share the space with them. And yeah, like if I get to do more programming in the future for any arts related event, I should, like be more mindful and do it from the start instead of just letting it happen. But
Sometimes that's the best way, though, when you just let it happen. And how about you, Erika? Were you involved in any, well, a lot of your work is with women, with your story. Kind of what you do.
There hasn't been that much, but starting from the founding of the Salon for Women Writers in New York City, which, hosted sometimes up to 200 women and, Kate Millett, like just about everybody who we, at one point or another, ended up in my apartment in Westbeth reading. But those were all women. And certainly the first couple of years of HERstory was all women. And some of our programs remain all women. We've been in the jail since 2006. And our logic there was that women are much more silenced. If you even watched good programs about the Raise the Age campaign or some of the things, you almost only hear like male, incarcerated young males talking. The women are left out of things. So I think to this day, we have decided that where women have been much more marginalized, that we were going to keep the women only. We did have one men's program finally out of 5 in the jails just before COVID struck. But so it's an interesting balance to me because I think that there was strength sometimes in the all women's programs. People asked if we want to have an all women's group for the Student Voices this summer, since we're having disabilities, dreamers, and I'm really not sure anymore. Or should the women, but usually they're majority women, just by choice, by nature,
Okay. Now, in 1985, Guerrilla Girls, an anonymous group of feminist female visual artists devoted to fighting sexism and racism within the art world, formed in New York City. The mission was to bring gender and racial inequality into focus with the greater arts community. More recent involvements like the Me Too movement continues the fight of inequality. So could we discuss what artistic and cultural areas still suffer the most from gender inequality and offer suggestions you have to rectify this? And Karen, you already did a show with the Guerrilla Girls, so maybe we'll start with you.
If I may just jump in before this, I am fascinated by the concept of Guerrilla Girls because I'm not from the visual arts world. I knew nothing about this until fairly recently because I saw a couple works were in a show at HERstory that I was at. And I went back to the office and, my grants manager looked at me like I had 3 heads. Like, what do you mean you don't know about Guerrilla Girls? And, so like, I was just fascinated by it. And I've spoken to some colleagues about it. My friend Barbara Applegate, who from the museum at Post, just like amazed me with the concept of this and like, wow. Just wow. So sorry to do that, but like it's a learning experience for me. And
well, to me also, I have to say I had not heard of them. And when I got the information on it, I did some research and I was like, where have I been? But absolutely fascinated by what they've done and what they're doing. Absolutely. But Karen, I think you should go first since you actually had a showing of their work.
So yeah, for people who aren't familiar, like I said, they're an anonymous collective of female artists who have been around since 1985, and they wear gorilla masks. I mean, the word Guerrilla Girls is like guerrilla warfare kind of gorilla, but they wear gorilla masks to remain anonymous, and they take the names of dead female artists like Frida Kahlo and others, and they do this really it's activist work, and from putting up posters in Soho in the 1980s to call attention to the fact that there weren't very many women artists being shown in the big galleries in Soho, to currently now being very active with a lot of political issues and where museums are getting their money, where the trustees are getting their money. So not just women's issues, but issues that affect artists and museums and directly, and they're very activist in their approach. So I really respect them because they've continued to do this work all these years. And, I had the opportunity to meet a couple of them a couple times. And, Frida Kahlo came and gave a talk at Stony Brook and signed her contract, Frida Kahlo. She was Frida Kahlo. I talked to her on the phone and emails. She was always Frida Kahlo, which is great. I love it. And they were terrific. But I think that now in terms of gender issues, whereas women have gained a lot of strides in this field, I think that there's still a lot of issues with the LGBTQ groups, with trans rights, as well as with the African American and other people of color issues that have really come to light lately, with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others. So I think that those are some issues that really need work in the arts as well as in other areas.
So true. Does anybody else want to comment on this specifically?
I thought I saw some nods in there, but okay, that's okay.
Erika?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, and I didn't mean to be negative before when Mark was saying, but I was actually very intrigued by the view of the fact that so many of the arts councils have women as directors. I was thinking of what Sally said earlier about the way things are sort of striated, and like say, crafts is not seen as much as arts. And as Mark was talking, I was thinking, are there more women? Because community arts are not seen as valid as, quote, high arts by the professionals. This is just a question I have, that, what I've seen is not only that that women's arts have been still, for everything that I think we've gained, and we've gained an enormous amount, there's still a kind of differentiation that I see around between high art and art of the people, and also between women's arts and, or else I'll just use literature. And so that I know that when women came, when women first started writing, there was a lot of elevation of the diary and the journal, which was the only literary form that many women were able to do. But women were not really let into the higher world or considered higher world of fiction. So anyway, I think this is a period of discomfort, and I'm saying it positively. I think that I think that there's a lot more listening we all have to do. There's that, and also the other big change is, and whether you're talking about LGBTQ or what, the change is that before it was a sort of false melding, where there was no equality and no identification, no real thing. Now I think that people are asking to be accepted for their differences. And I think that within the women's arts community, there's a lot of discomfort, certainly in literature, in a positive way. And I think that's just really important and healthy. And, I think we were all terrified at one point to sort of acknowledge that and really look openly. So.
Right. I'm going to fantastic comments and some questions over here. If I may go to a couple of them. Constance Slugget-Wolf made a comment when he was speaking earlier. The Power of Feminist Art has been one of the most important books in my life. And then she commented that her and another artist, Pam Waldrop, heard two of the Guerrilla Girls speak at an NAWA luncheon annual meeting, and it was absolutely awesome. So we've got some good fans here. There's one question, and there were two questions, and I'm going to see if I will read both of them. Alice Hockman Sprinson has asked two questions. One is, do you feel the crafts movement is less competitive and more cooperative because it is populated with more females than males?
Probably, yes.
Is that Sally? You're smiling.
Yeah, I probably go Alice. Yeah.
Maybe it was more of an observation than anything. But she has another question. Go ahead, Kieran.
Could I just jump in about that just for half a second? We had a program in February, a quilt making program in conjunction with a Faith Ringgold painting on a quilt that Faith Ringgold did. And it was great to see the people who showed up for this quilt making program, because it was all ages, it was male and female, it was community members and students, and a traditionally female idea of quilting, but it was appealing to everybody, and that was great to see. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
That's great.
That's quite all right. Any more comments on that? Because Alice had another question, and I rather like this one. She says, as an art student in the 60s, art history was taught as a male-dominated pursuit. Did this affect any of you?
Didn't make me not go into art. I took the same art history classes that she did, probably required. But I was a graphic design major, so that was a little different too. If you could do the work, you were hired. There wasn't discrimination there. I had 3 or 4 different jobs in graphic design after I graduated.
I studied art history in graduate school, and by the time I was there were just as many, if not more, female students than male, and a lot of female professors as well. However, the art history that was being taught was primarily by male artists still at that point. So, some of the contemporary artists were women, but, it was still largely very heavily male dominated in terms of the standard art history that was being taught.
Right.
And I think that's changed or changing.
Okay. I'm going to say, and wasn't that one of the Guerrilla Girls, one of their statistics was something like 98% of the nudes at the Metropolitan Museum of Art are female, yet 2% of the artists at the Metropolitan Museum of Art are female. There was that totally male-dominated perspective on that. And just like I say, it's been a great learning experience reading about that. Let me go to another question. This is Kazmira Mohanty. What do the panelists recommend to be more seen and heard as female artists?
Good question.
I just want to be seen and heard as an artist. Female doesn't, it doesn't cut it for me, just as an artist.
In my former job, I was in the performing arts. I worked at Tilla Center for the Performing Arts, and we were doing a pre-performance interview with Maren Alsop, a conductor, and one of the questions was, could you comment about being a female conductor? And you could tell she had probably been sick of getting that same question so many times. She said something, I just like it when people accept me as a conductor. Period. Let's talk about how I conduct. Whether I'm female, whether I have 3 heads and 2 arms, it doesn't matter anymore. And I think that's a good mindset there, that, we have to almost stop thinking as male, female, and just think of as artist.
I just wanted to point out too, though, that, as arts administrators, I can't speak as an artist since I'm not one, but, as an arts administrator, just making an effort to be more inclusive, whether it's, gender, whether it's, race and other identities. So I and I think that that's really important. And I'm part of the gallery, is part of the Stoller Center for the Arts, and every year the Stony Brook Film Festival happens, and Alan Ankles is the director of that, and he and there are more female film directors in the Stony Brook Film Festival than apparently I think any other film festival in the world, and and that's kudos to Alan Ankles for doing that. But it's part of, for him it's just picking the best films, and it just happens that a lot of them are women filmmakers.
Yeah. And if I could, maybe go along with the same idea, one of the theater companies on Long Island, Eastline Theater, does fantastic work. They just recently are in the process of moving, and this is not a time for any theater to be moving. They were a 45-seat black box. They do a lot of what I guess would be called non-traditional casting in shows. It doesn't matter if Theseus in A Midsummer Night's Dream is played by a man or a woman. They do a lot of fluid casting, and it just makes for some great theater. You don't even think about it. Oh, that's a woman playing a man. Oh, that's a man playing a woman. That's a transgender person up there. You don't see that. And I think this is the power of the arts, that it can, break through some boundaries fairly simply. But it takes like a lot of commitment to break through it. And it's not just a one-shot deal. This is in everything I have seen there has been cast like that, by who's the best person to play the part, not male, female, anything. And it's a good role model for us. Constance Wolf, Connie Sloggett Wolf, says, of course, I didn't have many female teachers in the 70s and the 80s. And she's an art teacher in Northport right now, and doing great work. Thank you. I hope the kids in some of the school districts around here realize the fabulous art teachers they have. But she talked earlier. I studied with Rudolph Baranek, who was married to Mae Stevens, and he taught me to be a feminist. Do you have any mentors like him, them? That's a heck of a statement there.
They were our high school teachers at music and art.
Really?
Yep.
Excellent. Were they your teachers as well?
No, my friends had them. I didn't happen to be in any of their classes, but they were totally popular at the High School of Music and Art.
Interesting. Any other? We did talk about some role models before, but were there any people that have come to your mind since then?
I'll say Mary Ann Shear, who was a jeweler, who was one of my only two female art teachers at Kent State. She was at the time developing a piece of jewelry that you could wear that would monitor your heartbeat with liquid crystals.
Huh.
She became somewhat famous for that. I think she now lives down in North Carolina, and has work in the gallery at Penland School of Crafts. But she was a role model for me too. I took her jewelry class my last term in school. That was a lucky thing for me.
Excellent. That's interesting. It almost brings me back to some other things, but we won't go into. Here's one question I wanted to find this. We were talking earlier, and Thais Ferreira, I thought I had a different last name for her. I could be mistaken. One could argue that online platforms, in a way, have helped us surpass certain biases. This must have been in the bias question. Having the ability to present your work and cultivate your own audience, regardless of gender, ethnicity, etc. What are your experiences with online platforms been, and do you think it's an equalizer?
I post a lot on Instagram, and I have male and female followers, and I follow males and females, but I have a very limited focus, in the art and a few other topics on Instagram. I don't know. Yeah, kind of depends on what your handle is, whether you're anonymized, male, female. Yeah, mine's just my last name with some numbers after it, so one wouldn't know, except some things obviously, well, maybe not obviously. I was going to say some of my artwork looks feminine. I don't know if that's true. Maybe.
I mean, if I can just briefly add to that, if any of you are on Twitter and if you've been following, there's this new hashtag called Publishing Paid Me. So it's about how much publishing pays women versus men, or white people versus people of color, straight people versus queer people, so on and so forth. And the result has been appalling, because if any of you know, since we're based in New York, if any of you know N.K. Jemisin, who's really this famous writer, and her numbers are literally like 1/10 of what a debut white male author got for his advance, and it was like no, I mean, everybody knew there was some sort of discrimination going on there based on different like identities, but nobody kind of like realized exactly how bad it was. And I saw like people who were like veterans in the publishing industry still being kind of like being surprised. And yeah, it was kind of like really disheartening, because we are in 2020 after all, and you would think like things like this did not matter, but apparently it does. So.
And I know at one point, a lot of auditions for classical musicians, like the major orchestras in the country, were done behind screens. So you didn't know if the person playing was a male or a female. They would just eliminated that any kind of bias you might have had. So you were strictly going on their musical abilities. And that was, almost a breakthrough. But it's just such an odd thing that you'd even have to say something like that. We are in the 21st century. Yeah, right. Yes. Sometimes I do wonder about that. But, that someone realized, oh, there is a bias going on here. If we just do that, it happens blindly, and you are just hiring on the talent. And a lot of for the art shows we do, it's anonymous. Things go to a juror. They just see the art and they make their decisions that way, which I think is an equalizer as far as this. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. But, where things that you do, though, get into, jurors have certain biases that they like this or they don't like that. I like craft, so I'm going to put more of these things in. I know I like photography and more, things are going to still go in, but that's different than a gender bias concept.
I was just going to say, in terms of the online platforms and equalizing, I think just that there's more information out there, and some of it is misinformation, but whether it's visual information, artwork or other information, there's more out there. There's more accessibility to it, and there's more international accessibility. So whereas before, like as a curator, before all of this, maybe your only way of finding out about different artworks was through, either hitting the pavement, going to galleries and visiting artist studios that you may or may not, have found out about. And now there's just so much more accessibility to see different artwork from around the world and different people. So, in that way, it might be seen as an equalizer. And the programming, like this program, could be seen by someone who otherwise wouldn't be able to get to Huntington if they're in a different part of the country or the world, So, so that's an accessibility issue.
Also, it doesn't cost.
Right.
I mean, I think that's the main thing. That I was just talking this afternoon to a group in Phoenix that are producing handmade, what they're calling zines. And there are visual artists who are producing, and the idea is it comes out of the Latino community. It's very, it's modest, but it's created by the people themselves. And they're also working online. And it's easy for people who have a community now, in a good way, that they don't have to be sanctioned by the power structure.
And we've got another Interesting comment here from Kazmira Mohanty. She said, I find it interesting as well that men have taken, oh, more are coming in, don't do that while I'm reading. Men have taken credit for artwork created by female artists, or female artists not being given credit for being adventurous in defining new movements like Hilma of Klint, abstract art. They always said it was Kandinsky. Are you, you're nodding your head, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, Hilma Clint had a solo show at the Guggenheim recently, and yeah, and she had done a lot of these really innovative work abstractions that had been kind of eclipsed by artists like Kandinsky, who got a lot of recognition for it. Even abstract expressionist Helen Frankenthaler did, stain paintings before other artists, and just these kinds of things that then the male artist tends to get more recognition for it. So yes, that's a good point.
Sonia Delaunay too. Yeah, another one.
Yeah.
Also, Margaret Keane, the person who used to paint big-eyed children, and all her artwork was stolen by her husband and passed off in his name till it was discovered that, I think in the code of law, that it was discovered that she was the one who was painting it all wrong. There's a movie on it as well, so it's
Big eyes, yeah.
Yeah.
God, I don't know if I even dare read this, but Barbara Cario said this comment. When she was at Pratt in 1959, a psychology of art professor said, I'm just reading this, don't don't put the bricks at me. Men make art, women make babies. He said, I hope he was being provocative. Like,
It was real.
would you even care to comment on that? That was in 1959. I think, Kay, your comment just said it all right there. It's like, that's astounding.
Oh, it was normal. It was totally normal. I mean, at that point, I think women artists or women writers, and mostly the world I knew, that if they weren't mothers, it was looked upon badly. If they were mothers, that was differently. Tilly Olson once said something kind of wonderful. She's the one who wrote Silences, which was a real battle cry during the feminist movement, the second phase. And she said, look, all the quote great male artists, writers, so they go off to sea to have experiences to write about, but they don't have to do it for 20 years. And, the motherhood thing, that there was a whole thing. If women didn't have babies, then they wouldn't be able to know enough about life to write.
Well, welcome to the 1950s. I mean, yeah. That's just like almost, jaw dropping to read that. But yeah, that's an era. I think we've made some progress since then, definitely in all fields, and that's good. Wow.
Yeah, we can have babies and make art too. Ha.
There you go. You can do both. Yeah, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Or you can
My
choose.
son was born. That's when I got my first loom, so I could work at home, do commissioned work. So.
Go. Interesting. There's a name that has come up that we haven't mentioned, and it's three times. Lee Krasner. It's just another one of those maybe overlooked, because of Jackson Pollock. But and again, yeah, I think it was only recently that I saw a Lee Krasner painting, which kind of astounds me. That, well, why aren't we showing pieces by Lee Krasner? We did mention Frida Kahlo earlier. Karen, you mentioned her, and that Diego Rivera was definitely it. And I think I remember Barbara Applegate talking about, you would see things in the paper, artist land, Diego Rivera and his wife, Mrs. Rivera, land at Chicago Airport. That's what you used to see in the newspapers. Like, she almost didn't have an identity of her own when he was around. And astounding, because I do see a lot of her works these days.
but the feminist movement really elevated her. And I think it had to do with also the idea that women could do disturbing work. And that was a huge breakthrough. I think the whole movement around Frida Kahlo was, pretty amazing, because it wasn't the stereotype of the gentle, accepting, loving sort of mother figure.
And I don't, it's funny because sometimes you don't know you're being a role model while you're being a role model. It's only in retrospect that you get that. I don't think she cared. Perhaps I'm mistaken on what I read of her, but it's like she was an artist, and that's all there was to it. And she had a very interesting life and lived really her life, which apparently from some of the comments I'm seeing was not how women used to do it back in 1959 and 1962. Yeah. A lot of the same type comments.
Like with Max.
Say that again?
Leonora Carrington, surrealist painter, and Max Ernst pretty much took over, like she was in his shadow.
Yeah. All right, there. I wish I had, there's just so many things that I can't find. Just female artist. Well, why don't we just start wrapping it up at this point? We're getting too close to that time. Would anybody care to make a comment or two to wrap it up, or something that came to mind on one of the other when we were expounding a little bit there? Yes. Well, Deborah, should we all go out and vote?
We certainly should. For whoever you want, just vote. And the main thing is get the young people out to vote. The numbers of the percentage of young people that vote in this country is dismal. It is so shocking. And we like to reach out to the young kids. We go to high schools, we go to colleges and say, it's your future. It's not ours. I'm older. It's your future. Vote for the change that you want to see. It's not democracy is not a spectator sport. You got to be involved. You got to vote.
The fact that they're demonstrating all over the country is a good sign, young people.
Yes, we think that this upcoming election, because of the demonstrations and the Me Too movement and the various things that have gone on in the past several years, we'll see a bigger turnout. And it is their future. They can't be too busy to vote.
Amen. We'll have to broadcast this closer to some election dates,
Okay.
definitely, and the arts can be a great equalizer. So can the vote,
Absolutely.
and that's where they dovetail really beautifully. So, well, I want to thank our panelists tonight. Firstly, Deborah Cosher for moderating, Erika Duncan, Kay Sohini, Karen Levitov, Sally Shore. Thank you so much for this. I love doing these talks. They've been a passion of mine. It took me a while to get there. So please join us for some more. We're doing, like I said, the next one will be July 2nd, The Arts and Words. We're taking August off because we will hopefully be doing some other programming. We will be back in September with the Arts and Musical Theater. Just because I want to talk about musical theater, that's my background, so noblesse oblige on that. And we're planning a lot more for next year, some topical, we're actually opening it up to calls. If people have topics or things they want to have a talk on, they should send me an email about that and let me know. If they have panelists they think would be great for that topic, they should let me know. So with that, thank you for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful evening and be creative.
Thanks
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.